Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight.
It is outrageous that police are being shot at.
The suspect in the killing of police officer Ella French is held without bail. We have the details.
Many guns involved in Chicago crimes are bought by straw purchasers. So who are they, and can the flow of illegal guns be stopped?
They are furious.
Is the governor's order requiring masks in Illinois schools legal? A lawsuit argues that the answer is no.
Almost 40% of nursing home workers in Illinois are unvaccinated against COVID. Are mandates the answer?
The latest on the tornadoes that touched down west of Chicago and this week's dangerously hot weather.
Local efforts to reimagine what a call to 911 could be.
No, nobody knows.
Older artists are getting a second chance at stardom through the efforts of a local record label.
And renowned Chicago sculptor Richard Hunt and his years-in-the-making monument to crusading journalist Ida B. Wells in Bronzeville. But first, some of today's top stories. Former 22nd Ward Alderman Ricardo Munoz could be pleading guilty to federal fraud and money laundering charges. The 56-year-old is set to appear at a change of plea hearing next month. Federal prosecutors accuse Munoz of draining more than $38,000 from the City Council's Progressive Reform Caucus bank account and using the funds on trips, jewelry, iPhones, and tickets to sporting events. A group of Illinois engineers is celebrating the Senate's passage of a $1 trillion infrastructure bill. The American Council of Engineering Companies of Illinois says there are dozens of infrastructure improvements in the state that could be made with the new federal funding, including reconfiguring the Oak Street curve on Lakeshore Drive and repairing the rapidly deteriorating Eisenhower Expressway. U.S. senators voted 69-30 to pass the measure, and it now heads to the House. And tune in tomorrow night when we'll have more on the bill's impact on Illinois infrastructure. Unvaccinated neighbors from Indiana, Wisconsin, and Iowa are now urged to get a COVID test or quarantine for 10 days once they arrive in Chicago. The Chicago Travel Advisory has again been revised to include those three states, bringing the total to 31 plus Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. The Chicago Department of Public Health says this is the first time since mid-April that the advisory has had more states in orange than yellow, meaning with more than 15 cases per day per 100,000 people. Commissioner Dr. Allison Arwady has been hosting weekly Ask the Doc segments on social media since early in the pandemic, taking questions from the public. This week, she had some special guests.
And I wanted to bring someone in who is really seeing kids full-time as a pediatrician and answering Chicago area questions from parents and from their kids, and has been for a year and a half. And so, because this is the pediatrician I talk to the very most, she is invited. This is Dr. Abigail Hodges. She also happens to be my sister.
So cool.
So cool. And then this is her son. Do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Isaac. I'm 8.
Isaac is 8. Arwady, who's also a pediatrician, and her sister addressed many parents' questions. Next week, Dr. Arwady says she plans to focus on questions specific to reopening Chicago public schools. Up next, a bond hearing for the suspect charged with killing a Chicago police officer. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
The Chicago man who allegedly shot and killed a Chicago police officer Saturday night has been ordered held without bail. This as the city and Chicago Police Department mourn the loss of Officer Ella French. Governor J.B. Pritzker spoke about her death this morning.
The family of the officer French who passed away deserve to have the entire state grieve for their daughter. It is outrageous that police are being shot at. It is outrageous that we have violence that is boiling over. And it's not just in Chicago. It's in other parts of the state, and it's also all across the nation.
And WTTW News reporter Matt Masterson joins us now with more. Matt, remind us who the suspect here is in this alleged murder and what he's charged with.
So this is 21-year-old Amante Morgan. He was arrested immediately after the shooting, and he's now been charged with several felonies, including first-degree murder for Officer French's killing, as well as 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder of a peace officer and aggravated unlawful use of a weapon, among some other charges as well. And
Assistant State's Attorney James Murphy detailed what happened Saturday night in that shooting in his prosecution today. Remind us the story that he told.
So this, according to the prosecution, was a traffic stop that began over some expired license plate on an SUV. So French was driving with 2 other officers, and they pulled over this SUV with the expired plates that was carrying Amante Morgan, his brother Eric, and another woman on Saturday night. And essentially what happened was the officers got the 3 people out of the car, and a struggle broke out between Amante Morgan and one of the other officers. The Amante Morgan apparently wouldn't put down a drink or a cell phone that was in his hand, and he started struggling with one of the male officers. As that happened, Officer French was on the driver's side of the vehicle and came around to the passenger side. And as that happened, Amante Morgan allegedly opened fire on both. He hit Officer French once and killed her, and he also struck this other officer multiple times, and he remains in critical condition. And as this was happening, Amante Morgan's brother Eric allegedly fled on foot, and a 3rd officer was chasing him, heard the gunshots, and then returned to the vehicle. And as that happened, he got into a shootout with Amante Morgan and was actually shot Amante Morgan once or twice, and he remains hospitalized as of Tuesday.
Just a tragic situation. And you mentioned Eric Morgan. He was also in a court hearing today. What is he charged with?
So he isn't facing any murder charges like his brother is, but he's been held without bail, like Amante Morgan, on charges of unlawful use of a weapon by a felon and obstruction of justice. And both of these brothers are going to be back in court next Monday for additional hearings.
All right, we'll follow that. Thanks, Matt, very much.
Thanks.
And you can read Matt's full story on our website, WTTW.com/news. And federal authorities made a quick arrest of another man in connection with Officer French's killing. Jamel Danzy was charged yesterday by federal agents for allegedly acting as a straw purchaser in Indiana to buy the firearm allegedly used in the shooting. Just how big a factor is gun trafficking in Chicago's violence, and what can law enforcement do about it? Joining us with more are Alla Lefkowitz, litigation director at Everytown Law. She and Everytown Law are representing the city of Chicago in its suit against Westforth Sports in Indiana for allegedly selling hundreds of illegal guns that wound up on Chicago streets. And Daniel Webster, director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Prevention and Policy. Welcome, both of you, to Chicago tonight. Alla Lefkowitz, I'll start with you. What role does straw purchasing and gun trafficking play in Chicago's homicide problem?
Thank you for having me. Straw purchasing and gun trafficking play a major role in the gun violence problem in Chicago. We do know that in fact, the majority of the guns that end up being crime guns in Chicago come from out of state. And very frequently, they are trafficked over state lines, for example, from Missouri or from Indiana, where they are first straw purchased by individuals who could pass a background check. And then those individuals provide the firearms to individuals who cannot legally possess the firearms in Chicago.
And Daniel Webster, how does this straw purchasing typically work? Is it usually a friend who can legally purchase it buying for a friend that can't? Or is there some kind of pipeline that connects buyers and sellers?
Well, typically, there is some relationship of trust between the person who is, in essence, committing a crime, illegal straw purchase, on behalf of someone else. So they do it in part often for money, and sometimes some degree of loyalty, but, depending on the relationship.
And Daniel Webster, is there a limit on how many guns one person can buy?
No, very few states have any limitations on the number of guns that someone can purchase. There certainly are individuals who you might think of as serial straw purchasers who make a lot of purchases not for their own use, but for the clear intention to divert them for their own profit to individuals who typically can't legally possess guns and can't get them themselves. So the last thing I'll just say is that criminals have a strong preference to get new, what they refer to as fresh guns. They don't want to get something on the street that may have be connected to a shooting that they could get wrapped up into in an investigation. So this connection between the retail sale to new guns is a critical one that sort of starts guns into the underground gun market.
So a lot of them are just being purchased retail and new. Ala Lefkowitz, what responsibility does the gun dealer have to be able to identify someone that they think or presume might be buying for someone else?
Yes, that's a really important question, and that is exactly the subject of our lawsuit on behalf of the city of Chicago. All FFL, federal firearms licensees, otherwise known as gun dealers, are trained by the ATF to be able to spot straw purchasers. This happens at the beginning when they're originally licensed. It happens at every compliance inspection. So this is something they're very well aware of, kind of the red flags to know what to look out for. And it's unfortunately something that some dealers take less seriously than other dealers.
And so, Ala Lefkowitz, you mentioned the lawsuit that you are representing the city of Chicago against this gun store in Gary, Indiana. Just tell us about this lawsuit and why specifically you're going after this store.
Absolutely. That's a situation where we've alleged in our complaint that the store for years has been funneling hundreds, if not thousands, of illegal guns into the city of Chicago. And they've been repeatedly told by the ATF that they are not following federal regulations. And, it appears that they continue to engage in the kind of conduct which is really looking the other way when they have individuals that come in and buy, for example, 5 of the same handguns at the same time, or will buy 19 handguns in a short period. These are all really, red flags that the individual is a trafficker or a straw purchaser.
And Daniel Webster, the legal burden here is that the gun dealer has to knowingly be selling to a gun trafficker or straw purchaser. How difficult is that to prove?
That's a very high bar to prove, and that legal standard was put in place, frankly, by the gun industry, who sadly, are the ones who help write our federal gun laws. I think it's important to look at this tragedy not simply as a crime, but as a deep policy failure on federal policy to, again, sort of have such a high standard to charge people who are really doing criminal acts that are putting guns in the hands of dangerous people. But there are other policies that our research has found that clearly reduce these kinds of straw purchases and trafficking. Licensing requirements for firearm purchasers, for example. The fact that...
That's something that Illinois passed in recent years.
Yeah, well, Illinois has had such a law for a while, but they recently strengthened it this year in important ways. States like Indiana that have a lot of trafficking do not have these licensing requirements for purchasers, and therefore the entity that's doing the vetting is someone selling guns, as opposed to a public safety agent. So we found that licensing is a particularly important component of this. We've also found that state licensing, regulation, and oversight of gun dealers is also quite critical because, frankly, of the weaknesses in our federal laws. Our research shows that states that basically fill these gaps of the problems in our federal laws with purchaser licensing and good regulatory oversight of retail gun sellers have far less trafficking and less gun violence.
So it seems like rather than a patchwork of state laws here, a standard uniform set of federal laws, which have been debated ad nauseum and haven't really gone anywhere for years, would be a better approach. Ala Lefkowitz, what are the tools that law enforcement have in this current climate to go after gun traffickers? You saw President Biden a few weeks ago announce a beefed-up gun trafficking enforcement from the Department of Justice.
Absolutely. And there are steps that federal law enforcement can take, whether that's criminal charges with regard to either the source of the firearms, whether that's the dealer or whether that's the straw purchaser. There's also all sorts of regulations that can, compliance inspections, revocation of licenses when it comes to the gun dealers that can be utilized by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms right now.
All right, a very important discussion. We'll have to leave it right there. And our thanks to Ala Lefkowitz and Daniel Webster.
Thank you.
And now to Brandis for a look at COVID vaccine mandates in the healthcare industry. Brandis.
Paris, a growing number of private healthcare and nursing home providers have begun to mandate COVID-19 vaccines for staff and residents. Lagging vaccination rates at nursing homes prompted Governor J.B. Pritzker to last week require that all employees at state-operated nursing homes have the vaccine by early October. In Illinois, 84% of nursing home residents have been fully vaccinated, compared to just 62% of workers, according to the CDC. Joining us now to share her thoughts is Frances Lakowicz, Executive Director of Mercy Circle, a continuing care and retirement community in Mount Greenwood. Mercy Circle is part of the Trinity Health Group that recently implemented a vaccine mandate for its staff. We should also say we did invite several different unions that represent healthcare workers to join this discussion, but they all declined. Last week, in response to Governor Pritzker's announcement, AFSCME put out a statement saying it opposed, quote, rigid mandates. The statement went on to say that, quote, the employees in these congregate facilities have been on the job every day since the onset of this pandemic. We strongly oppose any effort to define them as part of the problem, rather than recognizing their dedication and the vitally important contributions they have made to protecting health and saving lives. Frances Lakowicz, thank you so much for joining us. We should also be clear that your staff there at Mercy Circle are not union, just so that we're certain that there's no confusion there. But first, tell us a little bit about Mercy Circle and the community. How many residents and staff do you have?
Well, thank you for your time today, Brent. I appreciate it. Mercy Circle has a total of 110 units. We're a pretty small CCRC in the Chicago South Side.
Okay. And how would you say the toll, how would you describe the toll that COVID-19 has taken on that community, both on your residents and your staff and residents' families?
It's been a tremendous toll. The separation from family members for our residents during the beginning of the pandemic and the peak really created some very dark times for us in our industry. And the impact of the unknown and the uncertainty of the virus and its impact or its spread throughout, if you remember, the elderly initially were affected, was quite scary for our residents and staff.
And what did that mean for, obviously, what were the mitigation measures? I'm sure, that meant going into sort of a lockdown, family and friends couldn't come visit, and the impact that has on the residents' well-being.
Exactly. So we were, all long-term care facilities were shut down for periods of time in which no visitors could come. It caused us to be very creative to try to find ways to keep family members and residents connected. Things like Zoom calls and Duo, FaceTime, and window visits and drive-by parades were done by family members to stay connected with residents.
So I understand that 100% of your residents there are vaccinated and 90% of your staff. You all were initially just encouraging the staff to be vaccinated, but Trinity Health, the network of which you're a part, recently decided to go ahead and impose the vaccine mandate. What do we know about what prompted the organization to do that?
Trinity Health initiated the mandate largely because of our core value of safety, resident and colleague safety. And we just thought that that was the most important thing and that we should do more. So we were fortunate to have already a high participation level among our colleagues, but this just helps push us over to reach that full compliance or participation with the vaccine.
Would you say the rapid spread of the Delta variant also factored into that decision?
I would say that, yes.
So for the unvaccinated staff, so far, what proportion would you say are simply hesitant to get it because they're just not certain? And what proportion would you say are adamantly opposed to getting it?
Well, at this time, we have about 7% of our staff that are still discerning doing the vaccine. And although I haven't, we did lose one staff member who was adamant about not going, but we really feel that it's just so important for the safety of our community, both colleagues and residents, that it's well worth the risks involved in terms of we can overcome anything for the safety of our residents.
And for Well, I was just going to ask, for those who are hesitant, what reason, or resistant, what reasons are they giving?
I'll share initially, most people had a wait and see attitude. So when we were among one of the first communities to be vaccinated in early January, and when I think other staff members saw that most of us at that time, probably about 70% of us had taken the vaccine, and they saw that we were fine. There were no severe adverse effects and everything was going well. And then I think as they see more and more people do the vaccine, they opted to do it too. So that wait and see approach, I think, was initially what accounted for a lot of people who delayed taking the vaccine. But now I think some people are just still thinking about it. But I do believe the Delta variant is changing some minds, as well as just seeing so many people going along with it, knowing that it's important for the safety of our community is also a factor, I think, that weighs on people when making that decision.
And how have residents and their families responded to the vaccine mandate?
Oh, they are extremely pleased. If we have a positive case in the building, we have to go on sort of like a lockdown again to a shorter time. And that really affects our residents and the quality of life. So having more vaccinated staff members and residents prevent more or lessen the opportunity to have a test positive and then having to shut down.
So going forward, you have this deadline of September 21st. And you mentioned one staff member did resign rather than meet the mandate and receive the vaccine. What do you think happens next? Will some people who have taken a hard line, will they remain part of the team?
We're really hoping that they do. We're hoping that they see the bigger picture here, because this is really not just, it's about our whole community and greater community. So we are really hoping that everyone does see that safety. Again, our core value of safety for our community, both residents and colleagues. That's really our most important priority.
Okay. Frances Lakowicz, thank you for the work and best of luck for the work that you do there at Mercy Circle, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. Have a blessed day.
Up next, a local record label brings new audiences to musicians whose work was overlooked in the past. Stay with us. Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight, Black Voices. What do you believe prevents a strong coalition of Black and Latino communities forming across the communities?
I want us to, as a nation, to find a way to come together.
Go down the block, get it from someone local, and keep the money in the community.
Black joy and the Black experience is magical.
There's much more ahead on the program, including reaction to the mask mandate for students and a lawsuit trying to stop it. But first, tucked away in Chicago's Little Village neighborhood, there's a record label breathing new life into forgotten music of the past. Chicago Tonight's Evan Garcia explores the musical world of Numero Group.
Music has always been a driving force for Andre Gibson. More than 40 years ago, while in college, he formed the Universal Togetherness Band.
During the process of our performing, we were recording. We were getting all this free recording time from Columbia College, the engineering department.
In 1982, the group performed on the local variety TV show, The Chicago Party.
We did this tune called Pull Up, and the rest is history. We had these red satin outfits on, and with the fringes that my mom had made for us, and it was pretty cool.
After a potential deal with Mercury Records fell through, the band broke up in the mid-'80s without releasing any music. That was until the Chicago record label Numero Group discovered the band while combing through the TV show's archives for a separate project.
The main obstacle to them being discovered before this is that they had never put out any records whatsoever. So really there was a very small chance of Universal Togetherness Band ever being discovered, and we got lucky enough to discover them.
More than 30 years after Gibson recorded the music, Numero Group released it to the world. Rob Sevier and Ken Shipley started Numero Group in 2003. The archival music label specializes in releasing music from forgotten artists of the past.
So we have what's known as the hits, right? You've got your Frank Sinatra's, your Earth, Wind and Fire's, your Pat Benatar's, whatever, and then there's a bunch of other stuff that's underneath there that for one reason or another didn't make it, right? So for an artist like T.L. Barrett, for instance, it's like, you know, his Like a Ship is, to me, probably a better record than Aretha Franklin's Amazing Grace, but circumstance and timing kind of kept it down, and now it's being, you know, because of our work, it's being lifted back up to its sort of rightful place.
Nobody knows all my sorrow.
Southside pastor and gospel singer T.L. Barrett recorded music in the 1970s with his youth choir that's now being sampled by Kanye West, DJ Khaled, and used in TV, film, and advertisements.
It is really wonderful. No, but not just for me, but for those young people that I promised that their labor would be productive and that they would hear their songs on the radio. I didn't know it was going to take this long, but that it would be trending. And now they are telling their children and their grandchildren, that's me. I'm in the alto section. You know, it's really beautiful.
Numero Group releases music spanning several genres, from the 1950s to about 2000. Shipley says online data helps direct the label.
What's so fascinating about what's happening in the digital space now is that the stats are telling us what people like. So you can look at something and be like, God, this has got 1 million streams. Maybe we should press that because this artist has 400,000 followers, and now there's an opportunity to maybe sell a lot of records.
This was mine.
Gibson says this musical second chance opens new doors for him.
I see a resurgence of old school being meshed up with the new beats. They have the technology, but they're looking for the content. And see, I got a full bag of content. Where there is love, filled with desire.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Evan Garcia.
Let it take you higher. Well, there is love.
Numero Group says their standard agreement with artists is a 50-50 equal split of profits. You can visit our website to hear more music from Gibson, Barrett, and other Numero Group musicians. And now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
Treasure trove of undiscovered music there. Thanks, Brandis. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, masks must be worn in Illinois schools, but a just-filed lawsuit could void that statewide executive order. We talk with the attorney who filed it and a pediatrician. As temperature and humidity spike, the Chicago area is warned of dangerous heat. What's behind that and yesterday's storms and tornadoes? We hear about a team of researchers that are exploring the different ways a 911 call could better serve people in crisis. And renowned sculptor Richard Hunt creates a monument for crusading journalist Ida B. Wells in Bronzeville. But first, some more of today's top stories. The city of Chicago expands its COVID-19 travel advisory. Indiana, Wisconsin, and Iowa are among the states added to the list today, bringing the total amount to 31, plus Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. Unvaccinated travelers coming from those places to Chicago are urged to quarantine for 10 days or receive a negative COVID test within 72 hours of their arrival. An average of 347 Chicagoans have been diagnosed each day with the coronavirus during the past week. That's a 46% increase from the previous week, according to the city's public health data. Big changes at the top of the Chicago Tribune. The paper announces the resignation of current editor Colin McMahon. He had served in the role for the last year and a half, capping off 34 years with the paper. The Tribune also announces that downstate Illinois native Mitch Pugh will take over the role. Pugh was most recently the editor of the Post and Courier in Charleston, South Carolina. And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, thank you. Backpacks, pencils, books, and now a new addition on the back-to-school shopping list, a mask. When they return to their classrooms, students and staff will have to wear a face covering under an executive order issued last week by Governor J.B. Pritzker. But now, a lawsuit seeks to strike it down. Amanda Vinicky joins us with more. Amanda, who's behind this lawsuit?
Well, Brenda, throughout the pandemic, executive orders issued by Governor J.B. Pritzker have been subject to a series of challenges. Now, several of those suits fighting against business restrictions were brought by attorney Tom DeVore. He's based out of the Metro East. And now he has filed a new complaint, and that is on behalf of a parent whose child attends school in Breeze, that's in Clinton County. In July, that school district voted to recommend masks but not require them. And now, because of Pritzker's executive order, district has to comply with state guidance that makes masks mandatory or risk repercussions from Illinois. DeVore says the governor is relying on the state's Emergency Management Act, and that act does not give Pritzker this sort of authority.
So he took it upon himself to create law because these local bodies were governing in a way that he didn't like. That's what this issue is all about. It's a brand new issue for the court.
DeVore says the governor is overstepping into the legislature's job. There was a bill that would have given administrations this sort of authority during emergencies, but it didn't pass the General Assembly. DeVore says that that's proof Pritzker can't legally do this now. He says in disasters and emergencies like a COVID pandemic, schools can take measures like mandating face coverings. But he says that is an issue to be taken up by local school districts and not the state. He says that Pritzker is acting like a tyrant, and he says that's what upset parents tell him too.
They are furious that this continued moving the goalpost is going on, and all of a sudden the governor's now trying to say, well, your local school district doesn't have any authority. I'm going to tell them what to do. They are absolutely furious.
Now, this is not just an issue in Illinois. There have been protests and a lot of upset parents in states, including Texas and Florida, where essentially the opposite is happening. Their governors have threatened to take action against schools that do require masks. Here's Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
We're going to do whatever we can to vindicate the rights of parents.
DeVore says he opposes what those governors are doing as well. He says he's arguing on a legal principle. So while the anti-masking parents he represents may not like it, he says he'd be filing a lawsuit against those governors too. Now, Dr. Taylor Heald-Sargent is a pediatric infectious disease specialist and says she hates that this issue of masking has come political when it's a public health issue.
There are many historical examples of public health recommendations being met with vehement opposition despite clear science advocating for their implementation. If you think back to seatbelts more recently, or farther back to smallpox vaccinations, we've had groups of people that are completely opposed to what are clear public health recommendations.
And she says those are the sort of circumstances that politicians have to get involved with. She says she does understand parents' concerns as back to school time approaches. Sorry, kids, it's coming. She hopes that children who are of age are heading back to school with the protection of the COVID vaccine. But younger ones, like her first grade daughter and preschool age son, she says in those cases, schools have to take preventative steps.
For the children younger than 12 who vaccine isn't an option for yet, we have to do everything we can to minimize risk of infection. And we know from the science that we learned last year that masking is our best line of defense.
When Governor Pritzker issued that school masking order last week, some Republicans vying for the GOP nomination for governor in next year's election denounced it, saying that there isn't really a risk of COVID outbreaks starting from schools and that kids are not at serious risk. I asked Dr. Heald-Sargent about that directly.
Can kids get infected? Can they transmit infection? And we know the answer to both of those questions is yes. They can get infected and they can transmit.
And while the risk for serious disease is more likely in adults and especially those without the vaccine, she says it can happen to youth, who, by the way, are now the largest unvaccinated group.
That doesn't mean that children aren't having severe disease. They are. And so even though the numbers might be lower, You don't want to compare something that's so horrible as the amount of adults getting infected with something that's still not good, which is the number of children getting infected. And certainly no one wants that to be their child.
When asked about the lawsuit today, Governor Pritzker said he took the action to issue that executive order to protect students, but also their families, staff, and the community at large.
Mandatory masks in schools, that's something that we've had before. And certainly we are still in an emergency. I think we can all see that the Delta variant is beginning to overtake parts of the country. ICU beds are now full, as I understand, in a number of states. And as you know, just because it's happening somewhere else does not mean that it's not coming to Illinois. We see our case numbers going up, our hospitalizations going up.
The governor did not, however, directly address any of the legal arguments made in this lawsuit by Attorney DeVore, who, by the way, is now running for judge. Now, when asked how schools are supposed to enforce this masking order, the governor said that schools have been enforcing dress codes for years. Back to you.
Amanda, thank you. Lots to keep an eye on. And now to Paris and the latest on a wild week of Chicago area weather. Paris.
That's right, Brandis, and today is the one-year anniversary of the derecho storm that brought dangerous and damaging winds to the Chicago area. And just yesterday, half a dozen or more tornadoes touched down in the Chicago suburbs, with more severe storms moving through the area as we speak right now and headed to the city. And those come as hot and humid conditions have prompted extreme heat warnings for the next several days. Joining us to talk about Chicago's wild weather week are Scott Collis, an atmospheric scientist at Argonne National Laboratory, and Victor Gensini, professor of geographic and atmospheric science at Northern Illinois University. Welcome back, both of you, to Chicago tonight. I'll start with you, Victor. We got reports that it's getting pretty bad out there again, especially northwest of the city. What's the latest that you're hearing?
Well, everybody in the Chicago metro area is under a severe thunderstorm warning right now. In fact, about 10 minutes ago, I had about a 60-mile-per-hour wind gust here at my house. So after the show, I'm going to go assess for tree damage. That warning will extend until 8:30 p.m. Central Local. So the Chicago metro area and downtown Chicago is still not out of the woods yet. We're still looking at the possibility for heavy downpours of rain, frequent lightning, and the possibility for damaging winds.
And Victor, just to clarify, if you're at Northern Illinois, you're in the DeKalb area, I assume?
Yeah, that's right. I live in the Sugar Grove area, which is just to the east of DeKalb, but the storms have passed through here already.
And so that area was hit last night as well. Scott, what are the factors driving these outbreak of storms and this extreme heat?
Well, there's one thing in common. That is the heat. Hotter air holds more moisture, and we currently have a flow of air from the Gulf of Mexico right now. And the Gulf of Mexico is actually sitting around about 1 degree Celsius, so, just about 2 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than normal for this time of year. And this time of year is the hottest that water mass gets. So it's pumping moisture and heat into our atmosphere. We don't have some of the upper level winds that really help make these really, really bad storms right now. But at the moment, that heat and moisture is enough to keep these storms going.
And Victor, as I understand, you actually spotted some of these tornado touchdowns last night. How many actually did touch down, and where were they?
I saw 5 tornadoes yesterday. The National Weather Service right now believes that around 7 tornadoes have been confirmed. 3 of those have ratings of EF1 on the Fujita scale. The high end of that, so roughly 110 miles per hour, we think. And those in particular would be the Sycamore, Illinois tornado, the Burlington, Illinois tornado, and the McHenry tornado. All of those will get at least EF1 rating right now in the preliminary fashion. And Scott is exactly right. It's the heat and humidity. Also, though, coming from the corn and soybeans around here today, we're not. I think many of us in August expect the heat and humidity. But if you walked outside today, it was oppressively humid. And then again, Scott is exactly right. That's what is helping fuel these storms.
And corn sweats is a term I learned when I came to Illinois, and I wish I didn't know.
What's the term?
Corn sweat.
Horn sweat. All right. Well, speaking of that, yes. We've got heat indices causing this horn sweat of about 110 degrees. How dangerous is that for people, for anybody, animals outside for long periods of time? Scott, go ahead, Victor.
Oh no, either of us I think are qualified for this question. I think the thing is, if you're exposed directly to the sunlight, not in the shade, if you're not staying hydrated, really this can overtake anybody, even the healthy of us. Outside, even if we're exercising outside and we feel like we can beat it, the reality is heat exhaustion and heat stroke are very, very real, and they often kill more people every year than something like tornadoes.
And Scott, I'll give you a stab at this as well.
Yeah, so the heat index, which is what our excessive heat warning is based on, is a mixture of the humidity and the temperature. And what it's really meant to represent is the ability for your sweat to work. Your sweat cools you down, it evaporates. When it gets really moist and muggy like this, it just doesn't work so good. So everyone should be staying hydrated and trying to stay out of the elements over the next couple of days.
So now that I have you both on, I want to ask your reaction to this very stark Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report that came out. Scott Collins, first to you, saying that it's very likely that the Earth is going to warm another 1.5 degrees over the next decade plus, and we're going to have to do a lot of work to keep carbon dioxide at levels to not make the Earth warm more. What's your reaction?
Just to clarify, the number we're talking about is 1.5 degrees total warming. We're already at 1.1 degrees Celsius total warming, 1.5 degrees, about 2.7. This is an amazing report. The language in this report is more stark and more clear and more brutal than any other past report. It really is a sign how our climate science has gotten a lot better, that we're starting to learn how to attribute weather to climate, the weather that we see that will be a result of these increased temperatures. The other thing that the IPCC did is they designed an emissions curve to keep emissions at 1.5, keep temperatures at 1.5 degrees Celsius. So there is a blueprint for how to avoid the worst effects of climate change.
And that really is limiting and even taking out massive levels of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Victor Gensini, and we should stipulate we don't know with any kind of definitive proof that a single weather event like today and yesterday is tied to climate change, but we're talking in the aggregate warming and more severe weather. What does this report portend for Chicago and the Midwest?
Well, Scott hit the nail on the head. It's a long report. It's 3,500 pages. There is a lot of, I think, doom and gloom in there, to be honest. But there's also a lot of hope. The plan is laid out in terms of what we can do to mitigate carbon emissions going forward. For the Chicagoland area, especially when it comes to heat and humidity, actually, the report has actually shown that the number of hot days here, if you compare to 1930s, say 1950s, has gone down. A lot of that is because we're changing the land surface around northern Illinois and especially portions of the Corn Belt, where we have a lot of corn and soybeans, which actually brings up the temperature at night. But during the day, it's a little bit harder to get over, say, 100 and 105 degrees Fahrenheit. We should see heavier rainfalls, more efficient rainfalls. This obviously has big impacts on things like urban flooding and agriculture across the northern Illinois area. So there's lots to digest here, including the impacts of changes for things like severe thunderstorms, which we are seeing right now.
All right, we're going to keep digesting this as these storms progress and if they progress the rest of the week. But for now, our thanks to Scott Collis and Victor Gensini.
Thanks, Paris.
Thank you.
And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. 911 gets dialed for all sorts of emergencies and sometimes non-emergencies. The University of Chicago's Health Lab is working with community members to see how the nation's emergency response system can be transformed to better serve people in crisis. They say 911 calls should be reframed as a public health issue and not one of law enforcement. Joining us to discuss this initiative is Rebecca Newstetter, Executive Director of the Health Lab at the University of Chicago. Rebecca, thank you for joining us. So first, tell us a little bit about how we use, maybe we overuse or misuse 911 today, but tell us more about that.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Brandis. We think of 911 as a part of our system that has been in place forever, and it's really only about a half of a century old, yet it's one of the most heavily relied upon systems that we have. It represents one of the most effective public service campaigns in that, you ask a child over the age of maybe 2 or 3 what to do in the case of an emergency, and they tell you to call 911. But what has happened is that as a result of the way that the system was designed, we made a concerted decision to couple care with enforcement. And as a result, what happens is that some people never seek care because they fear enforcement, and other people who are in need of care receive enforcement in lieu of or in addition to care. And this initiative really is trying to reframe 911 as the public health and care service model that it should be.
And on that note about, some people not calling 911 because they are afraid of the kind of support that they may or may not get on the other end of that call, how are communities of color disproportionately impacted or impacted at all by the use of 911?
Communities of color, like in many issues that face us, there are issues of systemic racism in which communities of color are both over and under protected. 911 will serve communities of color in ways in which people will call and ask for assistance, but also will not respond necessarily in the ways that are needed. There are countless cases in Chicago and beyond where family members of people of color will call 911 seeking for care and assistance, specifically asking for paramedic and other sorts of ambulatory care, and the police are sent in lieu of what families are asking for and requesting. While at the same time, community members are looking for safety and care, but that those calls for well-being are not responded to in order to ensure that the right responder is responding at the right time, which doesn't necessarily mean that you need the quickest response. Oftentimes, the fastest response isn't the best response. We know that in many cases in our lives, and that many of the issues in which people are calling 911 are not manifestations that occurred instantaneously and require longer-term well-being and care in order to be supported for communities, particularly communities of color and communities that have been disenfranchised from well-being and care.
Rebecca, how would you say the current 911 system across the country is structured, and what are some of the limitations of it?
One of the biggest challenges in terms of 911 is that there's no one way in which it's structured. 911 is composed of about 6,000 different what we call public safety answering points, or PSAPs. They're governed completely differently, and we have not invested in them to make sure that they're not only high performing, or that we know very much about them. It's very much a black box. In most cases, people don't really know who operates their 911 center or their PSAP in local communities. We're trying to sort of open up that information and that black box through the ability to access information through our website, which is transform911.org. And there are other resources in which you can look at to find out where your PSAP is, and to determine whether or not your 911 center is a function of a police department, is a regional authority. And in some instances, 911 centers, to many people's surprise, are actually private entities that are run by for-profit corporations.
How might, for example, someone in a mental health crisis be better served or differently served through some sort of reimagined 911?
Ultimately, we do not think that there should be any wrong door towards care. And what we'd like to see is that there are more supports and better professionalization in terms of call taking. Call takers do an absolutely extraordinary job under very difficult circumstances, but it's a profession in which we've undervalued and underinvested in the workforce. So in pretty much every 911 center that I'm aware of across the country, there are incredibly high levels of attrition, which means, and there was a story that just came out of Philadelphia over the weekend, that calls are going unanswered because there isn't the workforce to answer them. And that those calls then are being answered and dispatched as quickly as possible, rather than taking the time to understand what the fundamental underlying needs are that people have, and to ensure that then the right responder is dispatched at the right time, rather than defaulting to police response when that may not be, in fact, the best response. And when police are deployed to calls for non-criminal matters, there's a risk that the situation can escalate.
Rebecca, we've got about 30 seconds left, but what could the end result of this project look like?
Yeah, ultimately what we want to do is we want to invest in the very front end of the system to ensure that call takers have the resources that they need in order to make sure that they understand the problems at hand, and that there are a whole variety of responders that can be dispatched, not just police and fire and EMS, but a whole fleet of community responders who are equipped to respond to the immediate crisis, but are also well positioned to do what we call second response and to make sure that after that crisis has been stabilized, that people are connected to long-term supports and care.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. We look forward to finding out more as you all progress in this project. Rebecca Newstetter, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, a Bronzeville monument years in the making. But first, a look at the weather.
Good night to stay inside and watch WTTW. When planning a new monument for the city, why not hire a local artist whose reputation is monumental? Sculptor Richard Hunt was born in Englewood in 1935. His works have been exported around the world from his studio here in Chicago. Producer Mark Vitale caught up with him back in June before the unveiling of a monument in Bronzeville that was years in the making.
50 years ago, this one-time electrical substation near DePaul was converted into a sculptor's laboratory. Richard Hunt has been grinding, welding, and creating here since 1971.
When I got this place in the beginning, they had taken out all of the equipment except the crane, which of course I'm glad they didn't take it out. So here you have this big high-ceilinged open space, to develop things in and move them around with a crane and get them out the back door.
His process is intuitive.
The way things work, I'll start, putting some things together that I have an idea about that'll suggest something.
Some of his 21st century works are currently on the terrace of the modern wing of the Art Institute. Richard Hunt graduated from the School of the Art Institute in 1957 with a degree in art education. But
one year, as I was working on my income tax, I said, I made more money selling sculpture than I did from my teaching job. And so I decided I'd quit teaching and just be a sculptor.
He has called his creations a dialogue between himself, the technique, and the material.
It's dynamic and it's three-dimensional. I mean, that is to say, you're going to have a painting of something on the wall. There's something that you look at that doesn't change. But if you have a sculpture somewhere, you look at it from here, you look at it from there, or you look at it from another side, and it reveals itself in different ways.
He works with steel, bronze, copper, brass, and all kinds of scrap. Early in his career, he focused on found materials. In the 1960s, Studs Terkel asked him about it.
Mr. Hunt, as we're looking at your various works, these two statues, these two works of sculpture in front of us, what's the material? How did this come to be? What is the steel?
Yes, well, the raw material for these are automobile bumpers.
Richard Hunt's sculptures can be seen all over the city, from the Woodson Regional Library to Midway Airport to the Loop. His newest work in Chicago is Light of Truth, a monument in bronze to Ida B. Wells, the crusading journalist. A local author who is Ida B. Wells' great-granddaughter spent 13 years to bring to life this unconventional civic memorial.
We made a decision before we even contacted Richard that we wanted to have something that would not be in her likeness. We wanted it to be a monument versus a statue because Ida's life and her work was so multidimensional, so multi-layered that we felt trying to capture one pose would not necessarily capture all of who she was. The Ida B. Wells homes were right here on this land from 1941 to 2002. A tribute needed to be given to Ida on the land where the homes once stood, which is also really close to the house that she physically lived in, And this is Bronzeville. This neighborhood has a strong, rich history.
You know, I'm reminded of the past and then looking toward the future of this community.
In the studio he's run for half a century, 85-year-old Richard Hunt is back to the grind.
It's interesting how the cityscape has changed, and of course I'm happy that I've had an opportunity to put a piece here and a piece there. It's been an important thing for me on many levels.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
The monument to Ida B. Wells is called Light of Truth, and Richard Hunt's work in the Modern Wing is up until September 20th. Make sure to watch our Chicago Stories documentary on Ida B. Wells and explore the companion website at WTTW.com/Ida B. Wells. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Tuesday night.
Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. The Senate passes the $1 trillion infrastructure bill. What does that mean for Illinois?
And a summer program is bringing the camping experience to a group of city teenagers at a local park. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay dry, maybe stay inside. Have a great night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm named on the 2021 expertise list of the best personal injury attorneys in Chicago.